This video is here to provide a definitive guide on how to dominate at 270, but first, some quick introductions. So, 270 is a turn-based strategy game where the goal is to win the presidency by winning the Electoral College. This video is a way too in-depth strategy guide for the game that I made between jobs, pulling a bit of a Ben Wyatt.
Depressed? I'm the furthest thing from depressed. I mean, look at what I've accomplished. Do you see him? Do you think a depressed person could make this? No.
This video is my claymation creation, you could say, so enjoy it. Okay, so we're gonna start by going into single player and playing against their AI opponent. First, we'll choose a candidate from a party. Now, as you can see, looking at these options, each of them has different bonuses and weaknesses. You want to look and see what their bonuses are, because that'll help you in-game. So for this example, we'll start and select Jeb, which gives us these bonuses and weaknesses. Now we know Jeb is good with the Latinos, so he gets 10% more money if Jeb wins the Latino state group, but he will only get 80% or so of the normal amount if he wins the African American group, since he has that minus 20% weakness. Now, we can also choose our opponent, so we'll just choose Bernie, why not? So, what you need to do for this game is essentially just choose your states, which states you want to invest in. So now, really, all that you have to do is choose which states to invest in, and how you decide that is you look at the states that are in those groups that we saw earlier with the candidates that we're wanting to capture, essentially, because that makes us money. Now, we're wanting to make it easy on ourselves, so we want to choose states that are part of the state groups we're going for, because once we get enough money in those states, we'll get the money from the state group. So to get a state to contribute to a state group, we're going to need at least 3 levels of funding in that state. Now that we've reached that 3rd level of funding in a state, you can see that it has started to contribute to the state groups that it's a part of. Now we'll fast forward a little bit, ... and as you see, we have completely gotten the Old South State Group, which means that we're now getting $60,000 each turn to spend in states in the Old South State Group. So that's essentially the strategy extrapolated. You choose states that help you get to unlocking state groups, which gets you more money, which gets you closer to 270.
So that is how you play the game to win. But what if we didn't just play willy-nilly based on our own flawed intuition? What if we harness the power of math and Excel to truly dominate the United States and not only reach 270, but also get every single American to vote for the one true candidate, crushing our opponents until they are naught but ash in our wake? Now to do this, we have to figure out how we can get to 270. So as any sane person would do, I decided to log all the information about the game in a master Excel sheet for days of tinkering and analysis.
Now in the description of this video, you're going to find a link to a downloadable Excel file, and that's going to contain all you need to implement my strategy. It contains 4 Excel sheets, state running tally, state group information, progress dashboard, and candidate info breakdown. Now the state running tally sheet is where you'll put the running total of your levels in a state and your opponent's level. This holds all information about the states, is color-coded based on the current status of the state, which is explained later, and provides a ranked list of which states to invest in, and filters to narrow states by which state group they're in. Now, the state group information sheet is where you're going to be putting your candidate's bonuses and weaknesses that we saw earlier, but otherwise isn't going to be interacted with. It'll help calculate state value on the state running tally section. The progress dashboard sheet contains a visual for how you and your opponent are progressing in winning state groups and getting electors. It also acts as the glossary for other information about the Excel file. You're not really going to interact with it, as it was mainly created as a visual aid for this video. Finally, the candidate information breakdown provides an overview of the calculated value of each candidate. I only created values for the free candidates and only calculated their value based on state group information, as will be explained later. The important thing to know right now is that John McCain is the best candidate for this strategy, but truly any candidate would work, which I'll show you at the end of the video. Now, to refresh the sorting regularly, you're going to want to go to the Home tab of the ribbon, and then on the second from the right is a Sort and Filter button. When you click it, a drop-down will open. You're going to go over to Reapply, right-click it, and select Add to Quick Access Toolbar. You're now going to be able to see it on the left over the ribbon, and you can just click that to refresh this table sorting very easily. I'll now show you exactly how to use this system in practice. Here's a super sped up version of me playing using this strategy as John McCain, the best person for the strategy as stated earlier, against the independent Donald Trump. Now all you have to do to use this system is you go to the state group information sheet and update the earnings multiplier column based on the info for your selected candidate. You'll then go to the state running tally sheet and edit the my tally column after each purchase and opponent tally after each round. You'll want to refresh the table at regular intervals, if not after each purchase, then at least after each state has been purchased to the level you want. It's quite straightforward. Now you'll want to purchase from the top state first to either 3 or 10, whichever is next, then go and purchase from the next state and the next. You'll want to skip states you can't purchase and keep going down the list until you run out of money and you end the round. As you'll see, although this strategy creates some moments of panic, overall it is by far the most effective strategy to win the state groups and eventually win the entire electorate. In this sample game, you can see that this strategy got me to win all 538 electoral votes. Now that the game has been concluded and we have in fact won all 538 electoral votes, we can now move on to an explanation of how this whole system even works. So to start, I first went into every state, state group, and candidate to get any and all relevant information. I first compiled all the information I could on each state, including the electoral votes, cost per turn, popular vote, and state groups it's in. You can see how I plotted that here, and although it's hidden when you download the file, that information is still there. I then got the earnings from each of the state groups per turn if I were to win that state group. I also created a pivot table from the state information to figure out how much winning each state group costs, which I call the total cost of purchase. I also find how many electors are in each state group. This isn't actually used in any of the equations. I just think it's pretty interesting. Now, the total cost of purchase is the sum of the state cost within an individual state group. So when you sum those up, you get the total cost of purchase. And to win a state group, you have to reach level 3 in enough states that you're going to reach 50% of the total cost of purchase. So the minimal cost of purchase is what we call that, and that's just total cost of purchase divided by 2. This information is going to be important later when determining state values. I then got the information for each candidate's bonuses and weaknesses to figure out which candidate option is the best for this strategy. I was planning on getting the information for all 150 characters that are available for purchase in this game, but then I realized just quite how far I'd fallen and decided to just stick with the characters that are free. Now that we have all the information compiled, we can finally start making the formulas needed to make the supreme plan to take over America.
To start, we need to choose which candidate we'll use to begin our conquest. To do this, we need to figure out each candidate's value. Now, the candidate value is calculated based on their bonuses and weaknesses, which is also called their earnings multiplier. We'll walk through an example of John McCain in the oil and gas state group to illustrate. So first, we take the earnings of oil and gas, which is 75, and multiply it by 1 plus the earnings multiplier for John McCain, which is 0.2. So that's 75 times 1.2, and that gives us 90. Now we call this the adjusted earnings. We're then going to divide the adjusted earnings, in this case 90, by the minimal cost of purchase for oil and gas, which is 803.25. We call this the adjusted earnings to cost ratio. Now finally, we're going to just sum up all the adjusted earnings to cost ratios for each state group, which is going to give us our candidate value. Now you can also see in the candidate info breakdown sheet that I added some columns for national groups and primary national group categories. Now the information is available, I just chose to ignore them entirely for the purpose of this strategy because I didn't think they were really useful. But I thought the info at least might be useful for future iterations or if you want to customize this yourself. Now as you can see in this, John McCain is the best candidate with a candidate value of 1.01, and Ted Cruz is the worst candidate way at the bottom with a sum of 0.928. So by default, without any candidate multipliers, the sum is 0.961, and that is how you calculate candidate value. Now that we have a candidate, we can move on to deciding which states to invest in. Strap in because this is about to get really complicated. So first, we need to create a value for each state based on the state group information. Essentially, the idea behind my entire strategy is that a state is only as valuable as the proportion of the state group's cost left it contributes to. So to begin, we have to calculate how much has already been contributed to each state group. So as an example, we'll check to see how much Alabama has contributed to the African American state group. To start, we need to check if Alabama is even in the African American state group. So we see from this X that it is. We then need to check if Alabama is at least the third level, since it's at the third level that states can start contributing to unlocking state groups. Now we can see in the My Tally column that it is as well. Finally, we need to check that we have a higher level in Alabama than our opponent, and again, we do. Once it's been established those three criteria are met, it means Alabama does in fact contribute to the African American state group. It contributes the cost of the state, which is 18, times 3 levels for the total of 54. We now use this exact same equation to the other cells. We can then take the sum of all of the state's contributions to the African American state group and add it to the state group information sheet in the amount contributed column. So the amount contributed is the sum of all the individual contributions from states to a given state group. We then calculate the cost left, which is minimal cost of purchase minus amount contributed. Now, if the amount contributed is more than the minimal cost of purchase, so the cost left would be negative, then we make the cost left 0, since you can't have less than 0 cost left. That just doesn't make sense. Now, the cost left is used later to determine the state's value, so keep an eye out for it. It's very important. We now need to take into account our opponent's state group contributions. We do this in the exact same way as for our contributions, but the exact opposite in some key places. I then take the ratio between the opponent investment and the minimal cost of purchase to create an opponent investment multiplier, which is going to be used later when determining state value. To find the overall state value, we first need to see how much the individual state group contribution is. To do so, we determine if the state is in the state group. If that's true, then we can figure out how much is contributed. If it isn't in the group, we'll set the contribution to blank. Using a VLOOKUP formula in the state group information sheet, we then compare the state cost to the cost left of the state group. If the state cost is less than or equal to the cost left, we can calculate the cost left proportion. If not, the state value is going to be set to 0. Now the cost left proportion is just state cost divided by cost left. Essentially, how much is one purchase of a level in a state going to contribute to getting to the cost left to make it 0. Finally, the individual state value from state group is just cost left proportion times adjusted earnings times opponent multiplier. And adjusted earnings and opponent multiplier are found using a VLOOKUP formula, again in the state group information sheet. Now, once that's calculated, you're going to simply sum up the earnings from each state group contribution for a state to get the total earnings. You then divide the total earnings by the state cost to get the overall state value. The higher the state value, the better. Now, this concludes the first part of our ranking system, and luckily the most complicated. The next part ranks which states to invest in based on you and your opponent's current investments. I'm calling this the compete score. The compete score is also the basis for the conditional formatting colors in the state running tally sheet that's in the state column all the way to the left. The compete score prioritizes states that are almost to 3 levels of investment, then states that are in battle, then states that haven't been invested in at all by either me or the opponent, and finally states that have already been won or lost completely. The higher the compete score, the more the state should be prioritized. The battle cost difference is used to rank states that are in battle based on how much of a cost difference there is between your state investment and your opponent's state investment. Here's how that's calculated. So if the state isn't in battle, the battle cost difference defaults to 10,000 just to get it out of the way. Otherwise, the battle cost difference is the state cost multiplied by my tally minus opponent tally. This way you can prioritize states with a closer cost difference when in battle, because the closer the cost difference, the more likely your opponent can overtake you in that state. I'll now quickly go over the overall sorting. So first you sort by compete score, largest to smallest, and then by state value, largest to smallest, and finally by battle cost difference, smallest to largest. This sorting optimizes for earning new state groups and investing in battles when it is most profitable. That concludes the explanation for this strategy. If you have any questions or ideas, feel free to reach out in the comments, and I'd love to see how well this strategy worked out for you, so feel free to tell me your results. As a final test to truly see how well this works, I'm going to try using this strategy against the hard AI, playing as the weakest candidate, according to my math, Ted Cruz, against the strongest candidate, John McCain. So without further ado, here is that in action.